Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Monday, the 11th of March in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Joe Biden tells Israel invading the Gazan city of Rafah would be crossing a red line.
The bond market faces its own Super Tuesday as a mixed US jobs report puts the focus on inflation.
Plus, a new Brexit hurdle why the Cheltenham Horse Racing Festival is now the latest sign of Britain's post-EU troubles.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. The US president has warned Israel that any invasion of the southern Gaza city of Rafah would cross a red line. Joe Biden was speaking as talks over a new 6-week ceasefire remain deadlocked. In an interview with MSNBC, he criticised the high death toll in Gaza.
There's red lines that if he crosses, he cannot have 30,000 more Palestinians dead as a consequence of going after. There's other ways to deal with the trauma caused by Hamas.
Biden had hoped for a breakthrough in talks before Ramadan, which began last night. Negotiations have stalled, with a Hamas official telling Bloomberg that nearly half of the 130 Israeli hostages still in captivity have died, they claim, due to Israeli bombardment.
Falling job vacancies in the UK are casting doubt over hopes for a swift economic rebound. The slow start to 2024 has seen job hotspots in the south in cities like Cambridge, Reading and Milton Keynes cool significantly. Bloomberg's Tima Adebayo has the details.
Job openings in England are at their lowest point in 3 years. Listings have dropped by almost a quarter in the 3 months to February, whilst applications continue to rise, pointing to a prolonged chill in the labour market. The news from Reed recruitment data throws cold water on hopes of a speedy economic recovery after recession hit last year. Despite the slowdown, Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves says her party has a plan to revive growth.
We've said that we would get debt falling as a share of GDP, we would balance day-to-day spending with tax receipts, and then subject to that, we would invest in those things to boost our growth and productivity, because that's absolutely key and has been the missing ingredient in the government's economic approach the last 14 years.
That was Labour's Rachel Reeves. The figures may come as a relief to Bank of England policymakers who previously feared a tight labour market could be fueling inflationary pressures. Less relieved will be the Prime Minister, who now faces a general election campaign in the shadow of slowing economic momentum. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
The shape of future Federal Reserve policy could hinge on inflation data coming this week. A Bloomberg survey of economists is forecasting that core CPI, which strips out food and fuel costs, will rise by 0.3% in February or 3.7% year on year. That would be the smallest annual advance since April 2021. Former US Treasury Secretary Larry Summers says there is potential for surprises.
Market used to be expecting 6 cuts in 2024. Now the market's expecting 3 cuts. And the Fed's carried that off skillfully. There hasn't been much disruption or dislocation as that change has taken place. But I think that's going to be there with us.
Larry Summers was speaking after Friday's US jobs report that saw jobless rates in the US climb to a 2-year high as hiring remained healthy. The data pointed to a cooler but yet resilient labour market.
Revised figures show Japan's GDP expanded in the fourth quarter, avoiding a technical recession. It's heightened expectations for the Bank of Japan to raise interest rates for the first time since 2007. The country's economy grew at an annualised pace of 0.4% in the last 3 months of last year. The yen and bonds rose on expectations the Bank of Japan is edging closer to ending the world's last negative interest rate as markets are preparing for a move as early as this month.
The world's biggest crude oil exporter, Aramco, has raised its total dividend for the last quarter to $31 billion, despite earnings taking a hit from lower oil output and prices. Net income at the company fell by 25% year on year. Aramco guided that the total distribution to investors and the Saudi government will be higher this year than it was in 2023. The company provides much of Riyadh's income, and the higher dividend will help it confront a widening budget deficit.
Portugal's Socialist Party has lost power in an election which saw the far right emerge as the third political force. The centre-right AD coalition had 77 seats against 75 for the Socialists, but the far-right Chega party quadrupled its standing, going from 12 seats to 48 and making it a kingmaker in any future coalition. Socialist Party leader Pedro Nuno Santos says his party needs to regain trust.
Chega had a very significant result that we cannot ignore. There are not 18.1% racist and xenophobic voters in Portugal. But there are many angry Portuguese that feel they have not been represented and that their problems have not been addressed. We want to regain the trust of these Portuguese.
The early election was cold after Socialist Prime Minister Antonio Costa quit in November amid a probe into alleged influence peddling.
And finally, Oppenheimer was the big winner at this year's Academy Awards. The film picked up a total of 7 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director for Christopher Nolan, who said the honour had great personal significance.
Movies are just a little bit over 100 years old. I mean, imagine being there 100 years into painting or theatre. We don't know where this incredible journey is going from here, but to know that you think that I'm a meaningful part of it means the world to me.
Best Director recipient Christopher Nolan speaking there. Other big winners included Emma Stone, who took home the Best Actress title for her work in Poor Things. Now, in a moment, we'll get the latest on the situation in the Middle East. But another story caught our eye this morning, and the subject is these US efforts to limit TikTok. Our opinion columnist Karishma Vaswani has been writing about this, that there are few things that can get both the American left and the right as exercises the idea that a foreign nation is perverting the minds of their young. I think this is also part of a bigger, perhaps, pushback against social media online, but it seems particularly also targeted at TikTok. She talks about who the winners might be.
Yeah, and pointing in particular to the platforms like YouTube and Instagram, which may see an influx of users if access to ByteDance or to TikTok is limited. But the point Karishma also makes in this piece is that, you know, many people are asking how the Silicon Valley companies haven't come up with something to rival TikTok, and essentially where this is also a failure of innovation from those big companies to be able to capture users in the same way that TikTok has, and that many of the users on that platform aren't going to be very happy if there is this move by lawmakers in the US to have internet service providers and app stores to have them stop offering TikTok to consumers, which is the proposal that is going to come up for a vote on the House of Representatives later this week. It's already passed through the committee stage last week, a 50-0 vote, so not that often that you can get everyone to agree on the same thing in American politics, but this is a situation which is clearly, as Krishna points out in this piece, touched a whole load of political touch points in the United States, but perhaps is, you know, not thinking about those people who love this platform and who want to keep using it.
Yeah, I mean, the under-18s in the US, I suppose, don't have a vote, so that might also be influential in this. You know, it's about who the lawmakers maybe are appealing to. But yes, I mean, wouldn't it be pretty seismic, I think, if you made the limits on TikTok so severe. Let's turn our attention, though, to the situation in Gaza. Talks over a ceasefire do appear to have stalled. Our Middle East and North Africa breaking news editor Dana Crash joins us now for more. Dana, good morning. Thanks for your time. What is the latest that we've heard then on the state of negotiations between Israel and Hamas?
it doesn't look like a ceasefire will be this week or materialize this week, and hopes were that they could reach one at the start of Ramadan, which is today. Israel said that they are trying to close some gaps in these negotiations, but they said that that Hamas doesn't want to stop the fight during Ramadan. Now, we know that the negotiations are still ongoing, and President Joe Biden said that he was still pushing for that 6-week ceasefire to allow in more aid and, of course, to stop the fighting there.
Joe Biden also warning Israel against invading the southern Gaza city of Rafah as well, though. Is Israel likely to heed those warnings?
Well, Israel has not yet set a deadline for Rafah's invasion, but has made it very clear that they intend on going after Hamas, and what they said, this is the last bastion of Hamas in Gaza. We're not very sure, and it doesn't seem that Israel will heed any of those warnings. Those warnings have been done before, but in reality, that plan had been paused to allow for ceasefire talks to materialize. And we saw President Biden say that Rafah's invasion was a red line, but then when he was asked again, he said that he could never have a red line, where it meant that he would stop providing Israel with arms because Israel's defense is critical. So it remains to be seen how the U.S. can, or how it would actually convince Israel not to go after Hamas in Rafah.
Yeah. What do we think that Benjamin Netanyahu and his calculation is in terms of the support for the US? Because also part of this was the new understanding about the hostage situation in Gaza. What is Benjamin Netanyahu's thinking, do you think, here?
So we saw President Biden lay his most critique of Benjamin Netanyahu since the war started last week, or on Saturday during his interview. And he said that Benjamin Netanyahu is hurting Israel rather than helping it in the way he is handling the war. Now, we saw a response from Netanyahu saying that he has the majority of Israel's support on his side. And this is kind of a major thing for him. We had a story a month ago, I believe, out of our Tel Aviv bureau saying how Israel was in this warrior mentality, and what happened on October 7 is staying in their memory, and it's still the mood there. So I think that Netanyahu is playing on that, and he says he does have the majority of the support to go after Hamas and of course finish the group as the plan was initially. But this is just how we're seeing the U.S. responding to this, is trying to balance the rhetoric here, trying to push Israel not to go after Rafah or take more responsibility and more consideration about the high death toll. But also they don't want to tarnish a longstanding relationship. This is the U.S.'s most important ally in the region.
OK, Donna Craich, thank you so much for joining us this morning, our Middle East breaking news editor, bringing us up to date with the latest on the situation in Gaza.
Now to a story here in the UK. The Cheltenham Horse Racing Festival, one of the biggest events in Europe's sporting calendar, kicks off this week. But this year the event faces new hurdles thanks to Brexit. Our Dublin reporter Olivia Fletcher joins us now for more. What are these new hurdles exactly to Cheltenham? What is the impact that they're going to have?
Yeah, so it's part of the UK government's plan to protect Britain's borders post-Brexit. They introduced new staggered rules from the end of January, so there's still more to come. But essentially at this stage, it's just 2 extra bits of paperwork. And that's still quite annoying for horse trainers and horse transporters who are tasked with bringing probably some of the most expensive horses in the world across the Irish Sea, and also to anyone else in the EU who wants to import goods into Britain. Makes things a little bit more onerous than they already were, because there were already post-Brexit rules in place. You know, for example, Ireland had already put in rules for goods entering Ireland from Britain. So yeah, things are just a little bit more annoying than they already were.
So we're talking about the transport of animals who have extremely high value, these thoroughbreds across the Irish Sea, to go to Cheltenham. How prepared were transporters for this extra red tape, and what have they told you about it?
Yeah, so, a draft of the plan was published in April last year. when I went to visit Willie Mullins last week, one of the most successful trainers in the history of the festival, at his stables in Ireland, I didn't get any tips while I was there, but he did say they've been doing practice runs in the lead up to the big event. And I also spoke to Aisling Flynn, who works for George Mullins Transport, if the paperwork's gotten worse since Brexit.
Oh, 100%, yeah. And it's been difficult to get your head around customs, and obviously runners going over could be worth maybe $1 million or more, than the average day-to-day horse.
Does this symbolise anything about the relationship between Ireland and the UK after Brexit?
I think this sport and this festival probably bonds the two countries together in a way that a lot of other things couldn't. The festival is hugely culturally important, to towns and villages across Ireland. But, in Britain, the late Queen Elizabeth regularly attended these rules, and, the Irish border rules had already been put in place post-Brexit, does create friction for businesses like horse transporters, when there was practically none when the UK was a member of the EU.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.